So with this in mind, we're going to go to the cry of dereliction. So this is Matthew 27, 46 and Mark 15:34. It's not in Luke. The cry of dereliction means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or that's what it's referring to. Before we get into the significance of this, I do want to take a little detour on what language was Jesus speaking. First of all, because I think it's interesting. This is the Biblical Languages podcast, and it is indeed quite interesting. And two, it's actually quite unclear. And there's been, like everything else in scholarship, quite a lot of debate about it. And you might be curious, if you're reading your English Bible, why there are these subtle differences between Matthew's version of this and Mark's. So Matthew's version has Eli Lama Sabachthani. Okay. Mark's version has Eloi Lema Sabachthani. Okay. So the main difference, and this is just pulling from the NA28 Greek New Testament. So that's just a standard text of the Greek New Testament. We'll look at in a second that there's a lot of variation in the manuscripts. So they're also giving us an interpretation. But the main difference between these two quotes in Matthew and Mark, at least as this Greek New Testament gives us, is in this first word, Eli versus Eloi, Eloi. And even so, even if you don't know Greek or Hebrew, you can tell that the words I'm saying sound different. Eli, Eloi. So Eli is in Matthew 27 and Eloi is Mark 15. Okay. So we're going to look at why these are different and try to explain the differences. The big question is this Hebrew or is it Aramaic? Okay. So that's the big question that we're asking. What is interesting, right, is that Jesus was probably often speaking Hebrew or Aramaic. I think he probably spoke Greek as well. But most of the time, the words are just in Greek. So most of the time, the authors don't really tell us what language he's speaking, and they don't really seem to care. They're more interested in whatever meaning is represented, and they just put it all in Greek. But there are a few instances where they say, hey, he said this exactly. These are the sounds that came out of his mouth kind of thing. And this is one of those instances. And so it's interesting to ask the question, what language was he speaking? So with that being said, looking at Matthew first, I have here pulled up the textual apparatus for Matthew 27 from the NA28. So what does that mean? It means that in this Greek New Testament, they give you all of the different readings in all the different manuscripts. So there's lots of different manuscripts of the Greek New Testament, and some of them have variations. Most of them are insignificant, and some of them are more significant. Okay. So here, I'm not going to go through all of this. It looks like complete gibberish if you don't know how to read it. But just to highlight some of the variations that we see in this verse for Matthew's Gospels. Again, if you think about a manuscript written in the 3rd century, here's the idea. It had a certain configuration of Greek letters here. And if another one a century later had a different configuration of Greek letters, then we're left with a decision to make on which one is the original. Okay. In this case, Matthew's gospel is kind of all over the map in the manuscripts. There are many manuscripts that have Eloi, Eloi, just like in Mark's. Okay. But the NA28, right, the people who are trying to figure out exactly what the original was are saying that that's probably not right because they have Eli, Eli in our Greek New Testament. And then there's all kinds of variations with the next two words as well. So instead of lemma, they have lama or lima. And instead of sabachthani, there's zdaftani and all other kinds of variations of sabachthani, sabachthane, or e. So just different variations. Okay. Mark is very similar. Some manuscripts, right, just like some manuscripts in Matthew have Eloi, Eloi, some manuscripts from Mark have Eli, Eli. And then again, instead of Lema Sabachthani, we have Lima Sabachthani, Lama Zdaftani. So what's going on here? Why is there so much variation in these Greek New Testament manuscripts for this phrase? So let's look at the differences between Eli and Eloi. So Eli would map onto Hebrew. It would sound just like that. Eli, which would be my God. Eloi would map onto Aramaic, and that would be Elohi. That would be my God in Aramaic. So you can see that they're similar, but the key difference is the O that we have in Aramaic. Okay. So the question to begin with is Eli or Eloi more likely to be the thing that Jesus said? What's very interesting is that in both Matthew and Mark, they record confusion over Jesus' words. So some people think that he's calling Elijah. That is the response. And it's weird because it's like, why would he be calling Elijah? And what makes you think he is? Well, Elijah's name is Eliah, which you could shorten to Eli, right? That is identical to the Hebrew Eli, what the shortened form would be. And even the longer form, Eliah, is very close to Eli. Versus Eloi would be much, much harder to confuse with Elijah in Greek. To me, this suggests, so if both Matthew and Mark are recording this, this suggests that Eli is the best reading of what Jesus said. So they are confusing Eli, referring to my God, with Greek Eli, referring to Elijah. So these might be people that didn't speak Hebrew or Aramaic, or Hebrew in this case, because I'm arguing that it's Hebrew. So they might be thinking, okay, I'm a Greek speaker. Oh, I heard him just say Eli, Eli, right? I didn't understand the rest of what he just said, but maybe he's calling Elijah, right? So they wait to see if he's calling Elijah. Obviously, nothing happens. And so this, to me, is a strong indicator that at least the first two words were probably Eli, Eli. So where does that leave us? The next word is Lama. So in some manuscripts, we have Lama. Some manuscripts, we have Lama or Lima. Lama would be Hebrew. Lama is why. Okay. Lema or Lima all could be variations of how this might be put into Greek from Aramaic, but that's Aramaic. Okay. So again, these are very close in this case. Lema, Lama, what's the difference, right? But you can see that there's confusion within the manuscripts, right? Because if we just said we started with Hebrew, and Lama would be the most natural thing to continue with because that's Hebrew. But